In a twist of fate that no one could have predicted, the story of Paul, a young black man full of dreams and aspirations, was brutally interrupted when, for no reason at all, he became the victim of a police shooting. This incident not only launched Paul into a battle for his life, but also ignited a heated debate about justice and equality that reverberated through his community and beyond. 6 months after that fateful night, something extraordinary happened. The tragedy that almost took his life became a source of inspiration and change, not only for him, but for everyone around him. Through pain and adversity, Paul emerged not only as a survivor, but as a catalyst for social and police reform. But what exactly has changed in these 6 months? How can such a devastating event give rise to such a transformative force? Get ready to dive into a story of resilience and hope that defies expectations and redefines the meaning of overcoming and justice. Join us as we explore Paul's journey of resilience and change. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video to join the conversation on justice and equality. What changes can we inspire together? Watch now and see how one life can move a community. On a gray afternoon, the tranquility of a peaceful town was abruptly interrupted by the sound of sirens and gunshots. A group of young white men, impetuous and armed, had decided that that day would be marked by an audacious armed robbery. Without fear of consequences, they faced the police with a ferocity that only youth and desperation can fuel. Shots rang out through the streets, echoing the drama and tension of the moment. To contain this wave of violence, the SWAT unit was called to the scene. These combat specialists, trained to face the most dangerous scenarios, arrived ready for a turnaround. With heavy equipment and refined strategies, SWAT positioned itself with precision, while the young men continued their resistance, the sound of gunfire mixing with the firm orders of commanders. The residents of the area, accustomed to an uneventful life, now found themselves immersed in an episode of pure terror. The windows that once framed scenes of a serene daily life now served as a shield for frightened faces peering at the chaos outside. The resilience of each police officer was put to the test as they advanced cautiously, inspired by the mission to protect. At the center of the turmoil, the confrontation intensified. The police, using containment tactics, tried to stop the robbers' advance without causing further damage. Each movement was calculated, each order executed with precision, but the young people responded with equal intensity, willing to do anything to avoid being captured. A climate of uncertainty hung in the air. With each passing minute, more support units arrived, increasing the pressure on the assailants. It was a battle of wills, where determination and bravery shaped the moments that followed. Meanwhile, the local population watched between admiration and fear, the unfolding of a confrontation that would be remembered for a long time. Stories of survival and heroism began to be woven among the whispers of those watching from afar. And, despite the imminent danger, there were those who saw that intervention as a source of inspiration. Young people who dreamed of a future in which such scenes were just memories of a less civilized time. It was moments like these that redefined the fine line between order and chaos. As the sun began to set, the hope of a peaceful resolution still burned in everyone's hearts. The conflict, although fierce, was close to an end, but the scars left would be difficult to erase. In this clash between young robbers and the experienced SWAT force, the lesson was clear. True strength comes from the ability to face adversity with courage and determination. How this episode would end was still unknown, but the community already felt the weight of the story being written before their eyes. And in the minds of every police officer and civilian present, the question that remained was, how far would you go to protect what is fair? Now, as the echoes of the gunshots began to fade, the narrative took a new direction, guiding those involved to unexpected paths and crossing destinations that until then seemed distant. This is the starting point for a new chapter, where the life of a young man named Paul would take an unexpectedly dangerous turn. The transition to the next topic is made naturally, like a shadow that follows the day as it sets, promising even greater revelations and challenges. Paul, a young black man with a resilient spirit, walked through the city's busy streets, returning from the NGO where he was studying business. With dreams that reached the sky, he aimed to open his own technology company, drawing inspiration from stories of overcoming and success. Polite and helpful, Paul was the pillar of his home, always ready to help his single mother, a strong woman who raised him with love and rigor. That day, something different pulsed in the air. Paul had just presented a business plan that was met with praise and promises of seeking investors from his professors. The upheaval this could bring to his life filled his heart with hope and anxiety. He couldn't wait to share the news with his mother, his safe haven. Every step I took towards home was filled with expectations. The route he had chosen to return home, although shorter, carried with it a reputation for danger. But that afternoon, driven by enthusiasm, Paul decided to take this route, motivated by the possibility of hugging his mother and revealing the good news to her as soon as possible. As he advanced, Paul's thoughts revolved around his future. He imagined the company working, the problems it would solve with its technology, the people it would employ. The inspiration for his journey was not just personal success, but the desire to contribute to society, to provide opportunities for other young people who, like him, needed a chance to prove themselves. However, the chosen path was quieter than usual. The streets, normally full of life, today seemed to hold their breath, as if sensing the impending drama. Paul, however, remained oblivious to the danger, lost in his dreams of entrepreneurship and social impact. To those watching from their windows, Paul was an example of determination. His confident walk and the gleam of hope in his eyes were a vivid contrast to the tense environment around him. Stories like Paul's are beacons of inspiration in communities often plagued by fear and uncertainty. And while he daydreamed about business meetings and market strategies, the reality around him began to take on a darker tone. Fate, like a cunning playwright, was setting the stage for a fortuitous encounter that would test all his beliefs about survival and justice. This young man, so full of plans and possibilities, didn't know he was just a few steps away from a turnaround that would change his life in a way that no business plan could predict. Life, with its ironies and unexpected lessons, was about to offer Paul an experience that would highlight the true value of overcoming and resilience. So, as the sun began to hide behind the buildings, the afternoon gave way to an evening that promised to be as enlightening as it was challenging. The next chapter of Paul's life was about to be written, in a tangle of circumstances that no one could have anticipated. That day seemed to be just another milestone on Paul's upward trajectory. The young man, still wrapped up in his reflections on the promising future that his teachers had predicted, opted for a shortcut that, although faster, carried a greater risk. This path, less traveled and illuminated, was known for being the scene of less auspicious occurrences, but the urgency of sharing his achievements drove him. As Paul took this shortcut, his mind was full of plans and strategies. He thought about how his future company could offer not just jobs, but also inspiration and a chance for other young people like him to change their life stories. It was a thought that gave him strength, a true inspiration that motivated him to move forward. However, the irony of fate prepared a dramatic turnaround. At the same moment that Paul was choosing his path, the robbers, frantically fleeing the police intervention described above, also found that same shortcut as an escape route. The coincidence of their paths was about to put Paul on a collision course with danger. Paul, lost in his dreams of overcoming and success, barely noticed the increase in noise around him. The gunshots, which before were just distant echoes, began to become clearer. The sound of hurried footsteps and heavy breathing blended into the environment, and what was a simple walk home turned into a race for survival. At a certain point, reality caught up with him. Paul realized the gravity of the situation when, as he turned a corner, he found himself face to face with the robbers. His heart raced, fear and survival instinct taking over his being. On impulse, he diverted his route, trying to distance himself from the imminent threat. This moment of terror was also one of clarity. Paul understood, in that instant, that life could change in the blink of an eye, and that his aspirations could be interrupted by circumstances beyond his control. The vulnerability of their situation highlighted the precariousness of life and the importance of each moment. As he ran, the sound of gunshots intensified. Paul felt each shot as if it were a wake-up call to reality. a brutal reminder that the path to realizing his dreams was paved with countless challenges. Every step was now a fight for his life, a race against destiny that seemed to want to drag him into its theater of absurdities. Amid the chaos, Paul had a glimmer of hope. He thought of his mother, of the woman who had sacrificed so much for him, of the person who had always believed in his ability to make a difference. This inspiration reignited his determination. He wouldn't give up, not without fighting with all his strength to overcome that adversity. With his heart pounding and adrenaline coursing through his veins, Paul continued his desperate run, each step a testament to his will to survive and thrive. However, fate still had more to its narrative. As night fell, events were about to take an even more dramatic turn, sending Paul towards an encounter that would truly define his journey of survival. Paul, his heart pounding with fear and hope, ran for his life as the sound of gunfire intensified around him. Night had fallen, and the dim street lighting only increased the tension of the moment. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every corner a new danger. But Paul, driven by the strength of survival, did not allow himself to stop. The exchange of gunfire between the police and the robbers made the air almost palpable. Charged with gunpowder and adrenaline, the experienced and determined police officers responded with precision, each shot an attempt to neutralize the threat that was disturbing the peace of the city. And in the midst of this chaos, Paul found himself involuntarily inserted, a victim of circumstances. The drama of his situation was exacerbated by the irony of his day. From a young man on the verge of transforming his life through education and entrepreneurship, to a fugitive in his own neighborhood, the twist in his story was both tragic and illustrative of the fragility of human existence. As he ran, Paul clearly heard the shots approaching. In an instant of absolute terror, he found himself crossing paths with one of the robbers. The encounter was brief, a mere second that seemed to last an eternity. The assailant's eyes, filled with despair and fear, met Paul's, and for a moment, the young man felt a glimpse of shared humanity, even in such a brutal context. However, reality did not allow for deep reflections. Instinctively, Paul swerved, trying to move away, but his movement put him further into the center of the line of fire. The fear of being hit made every breath a rush of pure survival instinct. The situation escalated quickly. The police, noticing the movement, intensified their efforts to stop the confrontation. They were trained for crisis situations, but the presence of a civilian like Paul complicated their operations. The tension between fulfilling his duty and ensuring the safety of everyone involved was palpable. At a crucial moment, a shot ricocheted close to where Paul was. The metallic sound was a cruel reminder of how close the danger was. Every step he took seemed to be accompanied by a sinister orchestra of bullets and screams, a symphony of chaos he had never imagined being part of. With every meter gained in his desperate run, Paul mentally reviewed his life, the dreams he had, the promises he had made to himself and his mother. The inspiration that had always guided him now turned into a survival mantra. He needed to overcome this test. He needed to live to achieve everything he had planned. As the night became increasingly dense, the clashes seemed to calm down. But before Paul could find a safe haven, one last encounter was about to take place. An encounter that would test his resilience to the extreme and put his life on a scale he never wanted to weigh. The night, already deep in its darkness, seemed to conspire against the clarity of those who found themselves at the epicenter of the urban chaos. Paul, breathing heavily and his heart beating at an alarming rate, continued his desperate run for safety. With every corner he turned, with every shadow that passed, he felt the weight of the danger that surrounded him. In the midst of the confrontation, the sudden separation of the assailants introduced a new level of confusion. They scattered in various directions, trying to escape the increasingly tight net that the police wove around them. This erratic movement was more than an escape tactic. It was a desperate act of survival, reflecting the drama and unpredictability of the situation. The police, in turn, faced increasing difficulty in distinguishing between the real criminals and an innocent young man like Paul, who, by a misfortune of fate, found himself caught in the middle of the crossfire. The tension was palpable, each decision fraught with potential tragic consequences. It was in a narrow, dimly lit alley that Paul's fate took an even darker turn, turning abruptly in an attempt to avoid a direct encounter with one of the fugitives. Paul found himself face to face with a police officer. The meeting was marked by fear and confusion. The police officer, trained to act quickly in threatening situations, found himself confronted with a quick, indistinct figure in the darkness. In an almost instinctive reflex, and under the high tension of the moment, a shot was fired. The sound of the gunshot reverberated through the alley, like a cruel verdict, a tragic twist in a night already filled with terror. Paul, hit, fell to the ground, the impact taking his breath away and flooding his body with sharp, piercing pain. The policeman, realizing what a terrible mistake he had made, ran to Paul. The dim lighting of the alley barely revealed the contours of the scene, but the gravity of the error was evident. The young man before him was clearly a civilian, an innocent whose only fault was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Regret and panic took over the police officer. With a trembling voice, he immediately called over the radio, urgently requesting an ambulance. With every second that passed, Paul fought against the darkness that threatened to envelop him, his mind wavering between consciousness and unconsciousness. Around him, more police arrived, the scene quickly turning into a frenzy of activity to save the young man's life. The effort to stop the blood was frantic, each movement of the police officers marked by an urgency that transcended normal protocol. They knew that every moment was precious. Every action could mean the difference between life and death for Paul. In this moment of crisis, the reality of how quickly life can change became painfully clear. What had begun as an afternoon of celebration and hope for Paul now teetered precariously on the edge of an abyss. The fight for survival, so intense and immediate, highlighted the fragility of existence and the speed with which dreams can be shattered. Is everything as expected in this section? Or would you like to make any adjustments before we move on to the next topic? Paul's situation, seriously injured in the dark alley, turned into a battlefield of another nature. Here, the enemy was time and blood loss. Police officers, now transformed into saviors, worked desperately to keep the young man alive. Every second counted, and the efficiency of your actions could mean the difference between life and death. The police officer who had fired the shot, an experienced man, and until then sure of his abilities and decisions, felt the weight of remorse crush his chest. As he watched his colleagues administer first aid, his mind relived the moment of the shooting, each detail a torment for his conscience. The inspiration for becoming a police officer had been to protect and serve, but in that tragic moment, he saw himself as a cause of pain and suffering. The ambulance arrived with an urgency that broke the silence of the night. First responders, equipped to deal with the gravity of the situation, took over with almost military efficiency. Paul was quickly assessed and prepared for transport, the paramedics' every movement reflecting the tension and seriousness of the moment. The police officer, unable to move away, followed every action, every decision made to save Paul's life. Hope and fear intertwined in his heart as he waited for any sign that Paul would survive. This moment of crisis revealed a vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to feel, a reminder of the human frailty that his uniform usually concealed. As Paul was taken to the ambulance, officers on scene began controlling the scene, ensuring nothing further compromised safety or assistance. The area was cordoned off, and investigations into the incident began immediately. Paul's drama, although personal and painful, also became a case study in the failures and challenges faced by police in high-tension situations. Inside the ambulance, the journey to the hospital was marked by a constant battle against time and Paul's deteriorating condition. The rescuers worked with a mix of precision and urgency, administering first aid and preparing Paul for the procedures he would face upon arrival at the hospital. The hospital, a beacon of hope for Paul and his family, was ready to receive the young man. Surgeons and doctors were alerted and awaited his arrival, ready to do whatever was necessary to preserve his life and health. The police officer, meanwhile, found himself at an emotional crossroads. The incident not only questioned his career, but also his concept of himself and his role in society. The decision of whether or not to join the police force weighed heavily on his mind. a personal upheaval that reflected the complexity of the choices and consequences faced by those sworn to protect others. As the ambulance disappeared into the night, taking Paul to fight for his life, the police officer remained behind, immersed in reflections on the price of justice and the mistakes that, even unintentional, can change lives forever. The stories of Paul and the police officer now intertwined in ways neither could have anticipated, a dark reminder that every action has its echo in the universe. At the hospital, the atmosphere was one of absolute tension as Paul was quickly taken to the operating room. Doctors and nurses moved with an urgency that reflected the severity of his condition. The medical team, a mix of experience and dedication, prepared for a surgery that would not only seek to save Paul's life, but also answer the hopes and prayers of a mother and an entire community. In the waiting room, Paul's mother, a woman whose strength had been tested countless times in her life, awaited news. Each minute seemed to stretch indefinitely. Each looked towards the surgical center doors, filled with a mix of hope and fear. She thought about all the times Paul had shown resilience and determination, and now more than ever, she needed to believe in her son's ability to overcome even the most drastic adversity. Meanwhile, in the operating room, surgeons worked with precision. The bullet, by a miracle that even they struggled to believe, had not hit any vital organs, but the risk of complications was still a palpable reality. Every decision, every cut, every suture was made with the awareness that the life of a young man full of dreams and potential was in his hands. The procedure, although complex, was unfolding with increasing signs that it would be successful. Relief was beginning to replace the tension on the faces of the medical team, a testament to the combination of skill, science, and, undeniably, a little luck that makes up medical practice. Outside the hospital, news of the incident began to spread, and the local community, along with activists and social justice advocates, began to mobilize. Paul, a young man seen by many as a symbol of hope and renewal, had also become an example of the failures and dangers faced by young black men in his own community. The inspiration his story provided was now tinged with outrage and a demand for change. Returning to the hospital, as the surgery came to an end, the medical team left the surgical center with news that would bring relief and renewal of faith to all who waited. Paul was alive, the bullet had been removed, and the chances of a full recovery were high. Paul's mother, upon receiving the news, felt a mixture of relief and gratitude so intense that she could only silently thank everyone who had played a role in the fight for her son's life. She knew the road to recovery would be long and full of challenges, but she also knew that overcoming was an intrinsic part of her son's spirit. As the night progressed into dawn, Paul's story began to take on new contours. His survival was not only a testament to his personal strength, but also a call to reflection on the values, injustices, and challenges that shape our society. After successful surgery, while Paul began his slow recovery process, the officer involved in the incident found himself at a crossroads in his own life and career. The night of the shooting not only marked Paul's skin with a physical scar, it also burned an indelible mark on the officer's conscience. In the days that followed, as Paul fought for recovery in the hospital, the officer struggled with his own doubts and regrets. The tragedy made him question not only his actions on that fateful night, but his entire career in the police force. He reflected on the times when his decisions had been guided more by trained instinct than by human understanding, and how that mistake had nearly cost him an innocent life. The decision to leave the police was not easy. It was a step that involved not only abandoning a career, but also rethinking one's identity and purpose in life. After days of introspection and discussions with colleagues and family, the officer finally made his decision. He resigned, a gesture that for him symbolized a need for change, both personal and institutional. When trying to find out Paul's health status, the police officer discovers the young man's talent and the search for an investor for his business idea. In the next video, see the unfolding of this story of overcoming.